Saturday morning. And of course, I am up at this early hour on the weekend to share an experience that happened to me about an hour and a half ago. So it's been a while, guys, since I've had an experience. So let me get right into it. It was interesting, strange. As always, my experiences are quite unusual. So I got up to go to the restroom. It was still early and went back to my bed, had storm sounds on for those of you who are interested, and shut my eyes. I was lying on my right side when I felt myself go into that place between being asleep and awake, what I like to call the sweet spot. Once I was there, I want to note there was something that was so interesting. It's been happening to me now pretty consistently when I have beyond body experiences. For those of you who are not familiar with beyond body experiences, it is different than an astral projection experience because I do not feel my spirit being separating from my body. It honestly feels as if my entire body is going through the experience, and that is my perception. So I actually, once I got to the point of being between being asleep and awake, I mentally lifted myself into the air. At least that's how I felt. I felt as if in my mind I was saying lift, and then I lifted into the air. I remember that. And then I rolled to the left and rolled right off the bed. Even though I wasn't really on the bed anymore, at least that's what I felt, as if I was going off the edge of the bed, guys. So when I came down, as I've told you before, there are times when I feel as if I'm going to hit the floor. I did feel that way. I thought, okay, I'm going to hit the floor for sure. And of course, I never do, and I did not on this occasion as well. Now, as soon as I went down to the ground, instead of pushing forward like I would normally feel, my God, guys, I felt myself hurtling backwards. It was so fast. It was, for those of you, and I'm sure most of you who are listening to this have wrote or written a roller coaster before, that feeling when you go down that first drop, when your stomach jumps up into your throat, that is what it feels like when I accelerate. Oh my gosh, it was so fast. And I can't remember moving backwards, guys. I don't remember that. I remember moving forwards, moving upwards, moving down, but not backwards. And I was accelerating at, as I said, an extremely fast pace. It was really quick. And as I slowed down, it felt a little bumpy, which was a little unusual as well. It felt like the ride was a little bumpy as I was starting to, I guess you could say, maybe land in this place wherever I was in the darkness. And as always, the darkness lifts. And as it lifted, I was in another darkness that I stepped out of. That's the only way I can really explain this, guys. I was almost like I was stepping out of the shadows or a building of some sort, maybe the shade. And the first thing I remember was my balance was a little shaky. This is something that I've dealt with before when I have first entered worlds. I feel a little unsteady, as if I am kind of out of balance a little bit. It was very kind of a strange thing, and I haven't felt this for a while. Maybe it's because it's been a while since I've had a beyond body experience. Once I got my balance, the first thing I saw, and I know, again, it's going to sound strange. First thing I saw was McDonald's. McDonald's, it was a restaurant, a version of McDonald's. This McDonald's had golden arches. I remember that. And there was a little sign under the McDonald's. And normally these signs will read, and to be honest with you, I haven't seen a sign like this under the arches. If you look under the arches, you'll see something that says drive through 24 hours or something like that. I haven't seen that in quite some time, especially in the modern McDonald's. I have not seen that. But what was really kind of strange was I remember there was a word on this sign that said, and for those of you who are my Spanish speaking listeners, please forgive me. I'm still working on pronunciation in Spanish. But the word said it was prometo, which I believe in Spanish means I promise. And I remember noting that in my head going, wow, this is interesting. As I'm looking at this McDonald's, I'm like, prometo. Okay, very strange. And I don't remember anything else really that was said on that little sign. Then I turned and I saw what was an amazing sight for me. I grew up partly in Chicago, as I've talked about before. Something I haven't necessarily specifically spoken about is the fact that I spent time in my youth. I was in the projects. What's where I lived for a while. And the projects, for those of you, I don't know how many of you will be familiar with this or not, because there may be people listening to this from other countries. The projects are these huge buildings, really, really tall. I can remember that it was kind of made of brick or whatever. It was tall, and on the face of this building, it's like a fence. There's fencing on each floor. Kind of reminded me of a prison, to be honest with you, and not a very pleasant place. And so the fact that I thought this was an amazing sight is because I haven't seen this since the 70s. And these, by the way, side note, the projects were torn down years ago. Where I lived on the south side of Chicago, projects, these buildings don't exist anymore. I have recently, when I visited Chicago and visited my family, I saw that these buildings were gone. They were torn down. So they no longer exist in that area. When I saw them, it was so nostalgic for me seeing them. But the other thing was, the building that I saw didn't look exactly like it. It was that same thing I always get when I'm in these parallel universes. It looks familiar, but there's a big, huge difference. And the difference here was this building was half the size of the projects that I remember. It was not as tall. It was almost like a miniature projects. But I do recall enough about the projects to remember that this is definitely what it was. And it was definitely, I believe, the projects that I spent time in. So this was, again, a very familiar thing to me. And I started walking toward the building. And as I did, these kids started coming up to me, and they started running around me and they were teasing me, and they were saying that I looked like Ronald McDonald. Again, very, very strange. When I looked down at my shadow, I could see that my hair looked, I don't know, I wasn't able to see a mirror. I had the perception, it's so funny, I had the perception that maybe I did look like Ronald McDonald. I don't know. From the shadow and the way my hair went up, and everybody I think knows what Ronald McDonald looks like, the clown. It was really, again, a very strange thing. Now, I shook these kids, I got away from them, and when I turned, I saw my aunt. All my family, by the way, lives in Chicago, including my aunt. And when I saw her, my first thought was, she's not going to recognize me. I don't know why I thought that. But then she looked at me and she said my name. As if she recognized me. And she was dressed differently. First of all, she looked a lot younger than she is now, which tells me that I may have gone back in the past somehow, some way, but I went back into the past in a parallel universe? I'm not sure. This version of my aunt was wearing these flowing clothes. They looked silky and they looked white, and she was wearing a white headband, which I thought was very interesting as well. I was just kind of looking at her. And once she said her name, once she said my name, I said her name, and I said, "Oh my gosh, it's you." And then I started going after her. I'm like, what world is this? What place is this? At this point, she seemed to just disappear. And it was as if, for those of you who can remember film, I know a lot of the movies now are digital, but if you were watching a film, it would skip a frame. And suddenly, like if someone were there in a film and you were watching a character or something, if the frame skipped, suddenly they might not be there anymore. And that's what it felt like. At that point, I also felt as if I was losing my grip on this reality and I had to focus. My priority became, in that moment, my priority became finding out what this world was called. So I turned and there was an outdoor area where I saw people eating. I believe it was for the McDonald's. And there was a man that I saw. He was black. But the thing I remember about him, I believe he had a mustache, I believe he had sunglasses, and I believe he was wearing a cowboy hat, which you would trust me when I tell you this, in the area I grew up in Chicago, on the south side, where the projects were, you would not see this. This would not be something you would see. But I think he was wearing a cowboy hat. And the other thing I noticed about this man was he did not have melanin in his skin. He looked like an albino, and his skin looked white, but I could still tell he was black. And so I approached this man and I said, "What world is this?" And this man looked at me and he said, I cannot pronounce this. I was thinking about this before I started recording this episode. I can't pronounce this word. I believe he said gutug, something like that. Gutug, something. Honestly, I think that's the way he pronounced it, but I can't be 100% sure, guys. I can't be 100% sure. It sounded like guteg to me. And I remember telling this man that I was from Earth, and then I said, "Do you know about Earth?" And this man kind of said, "Yeah, I know about Earth," but he had this sound and this tone in his voice that made it sound as if he wasn't very fond of the Earth. He did sound like it was like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of the Earth." It was like, "Oh yeah." And I believe we had a brief discussion, very brief, but I knew that I was running out of time. And I remember telling him, "Well, I'm going to tell everybody about this place." And then I thought to myself, I want to be back. And then boom, I opened my eyes and I was back here in my apartment. Very interesting, very strange experience, guys. And I'm glad I'm glad to know that I can still have them. Thank you so much for coming on another journey with me. And until next time, take care.